Hello there, and the warmest of completely unconditional welcomes to this, the 263rd edition of DF Direct Weekly, our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. Joining me, John Linneman. Hello.
Hey, Rich, I'm happy to see your Radeon 7 there, as always, on the window ledge.
Mm-hmm.
But what's that
Pride
board
of
in
place.
front of it?
On the left there is a PlayStation 5 board. Oh, no, you mean the one in front of the Radeon?
Yeah.
That is a Ryzen 4700S, which is a mini ITX board that is based on the PlayStation 5 APU.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but it's a terrible board, so I never use it. Therefore, it's there. And in front of it is a couple of console motherboards, PS5 and Series X there.
Nice.
Anyway, enough of my background furniture. Oliver Mackenzie, hello.
Hey, Rich, you have such interesting goodies back there. I almost want to come over and visit and just check out all the strange console motherboards you have hiding around and the die-harvested parts for PC manufacturers and things like that.
Yes, there's a lot of good stuff there, and even more in storage. But anyway, I think we should just crack on with our first news topic. But first, this. DF Direct Weekly is brought to you in partnership with Alienware. The latest state-of-the-art Alienware Area 51 delivers a flagship reborn with a focus on extreme high-quality design, cutting-edge silicon and thermal precision, and it's available now. In addition to top-end GPUs, the new Area 51 also supports AMD's Ryzen 9000 X3D processors, from the 9800 X3D up to and including the new 9950 X3D2. Ryzen 9000 X3D processors deliver by far and away the best CPU gaming performance we've tested to date and are a key recommendation for a high-spec gaming PC. And to keep performance sustained at the highest level, Alienware has overhauled the internals with a new gasket architecture. The system uses a combination of 180 and 140mm fans to create positive pressure, moving 25% more air while remaining 45% quieter than prior generations. Combined with a 1500 watt platinum PSU and enough thermal headroom to handle the 600 watt power draw of the RTX 5090, the new Area 51 is built for the absolute limit of modern PC gaming. Okay, so first news story of the week. In fact, we've got a couple of news stories coming up on the Switch too, but Star Fox, it has returned. A remake of Star Fox 64 is coming to Nintendo Switch 2, and sooner than you may believe. It's coming like next month, which is pretty awesome. John, I'm going to go to you first on this. A pretty extensive presentation there, and I'm curious what you make of it.
Yeah, so somehow Star Fox 64 has returned again. So that was the initial thing that made me kind of raise an eyebrow, because I'm like, all right, well, here we go again. As somebody that's been playing Star Fox 64 since its initial release, but there's no denying it's a great game. And you know what? I'm happy to revisit it again. I think this looks visually excellent. I'm extremely enamored with the visual designs here. I know there's been a lot of pushback against the character designs, and I get it because it can be a little jarring, but I appreciate that finally they've actually attempted to sort of deliver the look of those original puppets used to promote the first game, right? Like that's clearly what
Right.
they're aiming for. And I can respect anybody who says, yeah, I don't like this look or whatever. That's totally fine. But it definitely is something I think I like. So I'm happy to see that for starters. And that also seems to indicate that there's going to be a lot more in terms of story presentation. So there's already more cutscenes in just this direct than there was in the original game as a whole. Which some
Right.
might say like, don't pad it out, but you know, it's a game we've played before, right? So I think it's cool to sort of expand the story a little bit in that way. And the characters are important to the game anyway, so that's cool. But once they actually get into the gameplay, I'm loving what I'm seeing. First of all, 60 frames per second now. First time for Star Fox 64. Obviously, the N64 version was attempting 30. It mostly got there. And the 3DS remake was also 30 frames per second. This one's now 60. It looks gorgeous. They went for, dare I say, more of a Saga style blue skies look as opposed to the grayer look of the original, which again, some may say like, oh, it feels less like a war. but I think it looks cool. The water, the cliff size. This actually has a more modern rendering look to it than anything I think we've seen from Nintendo to date on this new system.
Agreed.
Like you look at Mario Kart World, you look at DK, Bonanza, all of these, they still very much look like Switch games, right? It looks like the same visual targets and designs that was established on Wii U and Switch, just at a higher resolution and performance, perhaps. This actually does feel more in line with sort of like modern rendering features, and I like that. I think it's cool to see, and I actually really wonder, one, what engine this is using, two, who's actually doing the heavy lifting on the development. Could it be Bandai Namco? I don't know. We don't actually have any insight into that yet. But one of the coolest things about it that really caught my eye is that the original game, and also here, is very heavy on liquids, right? Water, lava, all that kind of stuff. There's a ton of it in the game, which I always enjoyed, and they really go nuts here. And I think it looks excellent. Like all the waves crashing, the huge rise in the lava, the way the light plays off of it. Actually, there's that clip about 6 minutes 30 seconds into the direct. It weirdly reminded me of the first time I saw clips of Warhawk for PlayStation 3. You remember that water sim, Rich?
Yeah, sure.
Like it's that kind of thing, like even better than that, I would say. But like I love just like large bodies of water that are like very rough, like rough seas, flying over them quickly. I think that stuff rules, and it looks really cool here. So I mean, yeah, so basically by and large, while I am a little bummed by the fact that it's another remake, I still feel like this is a really great take on it. And I'm also surprised that they're selling it for quite a bit less. So that kind of shows the scope of it. And because of that, I do think that should hopefully guarantee it some success, because even though I love the shorter, smaller games like this, arcade style games, it is a tougher sell in the modern era. And knowing that uh Nintendo's attempts at doing Star Fox, aside from remaking 64, have largely fallen flat, both commercially, well, maybe commercially, but certainly in terms of critical response. I can see why they might have like sort of, decided to tackle this one again.
Okay, thanks for that, John. Oliver, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I think the thing that people are really focused on here is the cutscenes, perhaps fairly or unfairly, specifically the dialogue scenes, where the characters are kind of being pushed more towards animalistic proportions from the kind of very anthropomorphic proportions that they had previously. And they have more realistic materials and like detailed fur and feathers and all that good stuff. And I think there's probably something to the idea that they're being pushed a little bit uncomfortably towards realism. But I actually don't mind it so much. I think it's an interesting style. It's a very Japanese style. It's certainly unlike the kind of imagination movie that we saw just immediately prior to this in the presentation. It's definitely inspired by high-end CG a little bit, but it's not really trying to ape that kind of imagination super slick CG look, which I actually don't mind. I think it's very high quality and competent, if slightly unusual for a Nintendo game, because they do tend to go with a slightly cleaner look historically. But I also do think that the graphical fidelity here and the pristineness of the imagery and the cutscenes in particular, they're rendering out at 30 FPS. And to my eyes, at least, they appear to use DLSS because the edge artifact patterns that we're seeing in these sequences, at least judging from the relatively low quality presentation of the trailer, certainly there's some kind of temporal technique going on here, which is unusual by Nintendo standards. So I do wonder, maybe it's possibly external. I mean, they seem to indicate that it's Nintendo EPD in a couple things. So maybe there's some involvement from an external studio. But if it's not external, then certainly this means that Nintendo has upgraded their... I mean, there's some kind of technological change afoot at Nintendo, I suspect, with this game. Because it does look quite extraordinary in those sequences in a way that we haven't really seen from the Nintendo titles, pushing at that kind of cinematic realism in real time. I'm also a little bit curious about the GameChat portrayals, because they have that GameChat feature where you can stream yourself as the character, and I kind of wonder how they're doing that, because it's like a separate view of the game. I think that probably the backgrounds there would be pre-rendered backgrounds, would be simple 2D images, and then I would assume that it's a pretty simple shot, and also they can update it at a low resolution and at a low update potentially in the game chat, because game chat only goes out at like 8 FPS, right? So it's not needing to be at such a fast clip, I would suspect, in the actual game itself, which would explain that. Gameplay, I think, is a little bit less controversial here. Like, they seem to have nailed that in a way that I think players can generally recognize and realize. I think they've done a really great job here. They're still using like PBR materials, but it's a little bit simpler. They're aiming for 60 FPS, and it does seem to be quite a consistent 60 FPS. I did look at some of the edge patterns and aliasing and did some pixel counts here, and it appears to be 1080p, but without the benefit of TAA or DLSS, I suspect, just based on the fact that it's aliasing all over the place without the edge patterns we'd associate with temporal techniques. So this does seem to be a bit more like in the Nintendo remit of maybe a little more complex materials than Switch one, but still pushing out like this kind of DLSS-free 1080p presentation that's kind of more typical of what we've seen from Nintendo this generation. But yeah, overall, I think it's a very strong visual presentation. The fact that it's another Star Fox remake, which is like arguably the 5th time they've done the same concept in Star Fox, really just Star Fox Adventures, that kind of breaks the mold here. That's certainly a little bit odd, and I would have liked to have seen them explore a new concept. But it does seem cool, and like I haven't played Star Fox 64 in a long time, so I think this should fare pretty well. And the last time they tried this kind of spin on Star Fox, the original Star Fox experience or Star Fox 64 was Star Fox Zero, which I don't think was so well received. Not such a good game, had some very obvious control oddities. So hopefully this will do better for them, and certainly it seems like a more traditional experience and a more heavily upgraded experience. So hopefully it will do well for them. And I agree that the reduced cost, which I think is $50 or $60 physical, 50 digital, 60 physical, that seems both in line with what Nintendo is messaging about their reduced digital costs, potentially, and also a reasonable price for a game that is really mostly designed around replay value, I would suggest, and not really designed around the kind of like super long experience you might be expecting from some other Nintendo heavy hitters.
Yeah, they were emphasizing the replayability of it, right? The fact that you can go back to the old levels and undertake specific new challenges for them, which I think is a pretty good idea. I was really taken by the presentation here. I thought it looked really, really good. I'm not particularly wedded to the characters, so I wasn't particularly upset by the changes that were made in the cutscene presentations there. I thought that looked pretty good. I think it was quite impressive from a technological standpoint to be running on a low power piece of hardware like that to get that level of fidelity. But yes, I guess at 30 frames per second gameplay, I'm kind of like I'm just sort of on a similar vein to Pragmata recently, which it's kind of like an old school game in a way.
Oh yeah,
where we don't really get those type of experiences anymore. So to actually get a game kind of like retro inspired in a sense, definitely in the case of this one, brought to modern audiences with modern graphics, I'm all for it. I think this looks really, really cool. And yeah, I mean, the weird thing is though, it didn't quite strike me as a Nintendo game, which in this case I think is a good thing. I don't know, John, what do you think?
I mean, I think it ties into what I said earlier, in that we're seeing a different take on Nintendo visual design. They've really been strong about following that sort of like Wii U Switch style of visuals, like basically the Nintendo HD look.
Yeah.
And it's a good look, but I think they've struggled to find a way to sort of move on from that. And I'll be curious to see if they do go for that, because just increasing fidelity alone is not always the smart play. But if they can do it in a way that feels true to the character designs and like the visual design that they went for, then I'm all for it. And I do think this gets that right. I think it's really interesting looking.
Yeah.
And very cool.
Mm-hmm. Almost like an arcade game, I feel. But I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Actually looking at it again, what it reminds me of, it's like a higher detail version of those Lindbergh arcade games from Sega, like Afterburner Climax and all that. Like it kind of has that look, just with more visual detail going on. I think that's cool.
I've got a supporter question here from 1040 STF. After Metroid Prime, Paper Mario, and now Star Fox, with Ocarina of Time seemingly next, if the rumors are true, Nintendo appears to be embracing remakes that stay very faithful to their original structure, with various levels of graphics enhancements. Which game from Nintendo's back catalogue would you like to see remade in that same spirit? Personally, I'd go with Sin and Punishment and Super Metroid. And after seeing the beautiful water rendering in Star Fox, maybe a way for a remake for fun. For fun, yeah, sure. On a side note, I kind of wish Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 had taken the same quote-unquote enhanced original approach, more in the spirit of Super Mario All-Stars Mario. Sorry. but hey, that's me. John, we do seemingly have
Um,
an Ocarina of Time remake coming, if the rumors are
yeah,
true.
another one,
Another.
just like with Star Fox, there was a 3DS remake already. So we're further away from the 3DS remake than the remake on 3DS was from the original game, though, I think,
Mhm.
which is slightly frightening to think about. Sure, why not? I think we'll see what it looks like. I'm curious for sure. But this idea of rebuilding games in this way, I I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like Super Metroid or whatever in the future. That could be interesting as well.
Mhm.
They already did Metroid 2 from the Game Boy, so why not?
Mhm.
Um, Wave Race, mentioning that actually gets me excited. I was just thinking, I rather than a remake, I still think I'd like to see some sort of Wave Race action with the sort of modern water technology that we have today. Nobody's really gotten this right.
Right.
We just did an episode on this on the DF Retro Super Show. Check it out, where we talked about this. There was this period in the mid 90s, early 2000s where like so many developers were doing water sports games, and it was awesome. There was a lot of them during that time.
Yeah.
And water improvements were so cool to see, but then it just sort of died. So how about Wave Race World, where it's like a big like segment of ocean to race around, and we'll see.
Yeah.
But as for other Nintendo games I'd like to see done in this way, man, uh that is a bit tricky indeed.
Well, my
But
vote would go to Pilot Wings, but I think it would probably need to be a brand new game.
yeah, kind of, which they did on 3DS as well. I mean, I guess really something with F-Zero. People have been asking about that for years, but like high speed, arcade racing arcade racing games, they're never not appealing to me. So I would love to see that. I'd also love to see um just anything like arcade racing, man.
Yeah.
Just bring it back.
Bring it back. Oliver, any remakes you'd like to see?
I'm in complete agreement with John on the subject of arcade racers in general. I think F-Zero GX would be great, personally. I think that'd be a terrific game. I also think one of the Wave Race games would be good, but I totally agree that what Wave Race really needs, I think, is a new installment. I think that's really what it does need, because there's so many interesting things they could do with water technology. Do you remember the Hydro Thunder game, the 2010 Hydro Thunder Hurricane game, John?
Yeah.
That was quite a good title.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I there's also, I don't know if you ever played the original Hydro Thunder, was great.
Yeah.
But then the actual sequel was called H2 Overdrive, which
Right.
was the original, some of the original development teams. Hydro Thunder Hurricane was a totally different
It
studio.
was Vector Unit, I think.
But yeah, which did those like Moto or mobile
They did the
games as well, right?
Moto GP,
Like Awkward.
the Riptide GP games, those games.
Oh,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm really just thinking back to that title because it's the last kind of like water racing game I can remember, which goes back quite a ways because that was like 2010 or 2011 or something. It's just on the brain. But yeah, I'd love to see a new game, or maybe a remake of like, I don't know, Blue Storm or something. That would be reasonable as well. But yeah, there's a lot of Nintendo IP to go back from. I think that the difficulty with Nintendo at the moment is they have a lot of games that are available on NSO, and I think they kind of need to navigate between what are you delivering to players in the short term that is basically like emulation, and what do you want to deliver to players in the long term that is more remakes. I think with some titles like Ocarina of Time, they can get away with it because the visual divergence is so large, but like F-Zero GX is on NSO right now on Switch 2, so it's kind of like a hard question to manage for them, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good stuff. Well, let's move on. Okay, then. So just announced at the time of taping this particular direct, it has been confirmed that unfortunately we are looking at a price rise even for the Nintendo Switch 2. It's going to be rising from $449 to $499 from September the 1st, 2026. So I guess if you're looking to buy a Switch 2, at least you've got several months now to buy it at the current price, which is good, I guess. And yeah, there's going to be price rises in Canada and Europe as well. 680 Canadian dollars and 500 euros on my Nintendo store. Nintendo is saying that the change follows changes in market conditions. So I think we can guess what that's all about. the fact that memory costs so much more than it used to. This came out in a financial statement where they were apologizing for the impact on customers and other stakeholders. Oliver, going to go to you first. This was kind of inevitable, really.
I do strongly think it was inevitable, especially when you look at what other vendors have done in this space. Obviously, Sony has increased their PlayStation 5 prices after holding out for quite a while. Microsoft has done several rounds of increasing Series X prices, Series S prices around the world at various times. First, according to tariffs, and then according to component shortages, it seems. Component shortages in memory and possibly storage there as well. So these kinds of global issues have really been putting a damper on the console generation in the past year or so, and it's been not so great for console prices, I'd have to say. But I would also suggest here that they are, for the most part, outside of Japan, where they are pricing like a 20% price rise for the domestic edition, I believe. They are pricing this out in a more meager way than other vendors have, because like, look at the price rises and they're like, 7% here, 10% there, 8% there. It's like they're really trying to, I think, keep the cost rise within reasonable bounds. And they're also trying to delay it a little bit. Like I think the Japanese price rise is scheduled for later in May, but the other price rises are pushed out to September. So they're really trying to push units in the interim, and they're giving people who are interested in the platform plenty of opportunity to buy a console before the price rise kicks into effect. So I think that's quite good. But yeah, I think Nintendo's in a really tough position because you look at Sony and they've already sold, I think according to their latest financial results, 93 million PlayStation 5 consoles, quite a lot of units out there. Microsoft, on the other hand, is not reporting their sales through, but they've kind of, they're moving on to next gen fairly rapidly, I would think, and they don't really seem that concentrated on current generation platforms. It seems to have been, somewhat of a failure there. And they don't really seem all that invested in trying to build a huge platform. They're moving on to PC, they're moving on to bigger and better things. But Nintendo is in this position where, they've moved a lot of Switch 2 units, but they have not sold 93 million of them. They still need to build a platform here. And so I think they do need to keep price rises within reason and possibly, even backslide a bit on margin relative to what maybe some investors would like in order to secure the long-term health of their brand and long-term health of their platform. So I think they're in a tough position, but raising the price by effectively $50 and delaying it by, 4 months, I think that's a pretty reasonable strategy to go about this, especially relative to Microsoft and Sony, who have been a little bit more drastic with some price rises.
Yeah, bad news, but could have been worse. I don't know what you make of it, John.
I'm continuously concerned by the state of the world, the industry, everything going on right now. Prices are just out of control everywhere. Everything's going up. It really feels... it's pretty bad right now. It's hard not to be depressed by the state of things, and this just like adds on to it. Like, this is a minor blip in the grand scheme of what is going on, but yeah, it's I'm sure Nintendo certainly did not want to increase this price like any other company. But here it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the prices are going up as of May in Japan on all hardware, all Nintendo consoles. And it almost, I guess, if you look at it through a more simple lens, though, it's like they've basically taken the Mario Kart bundle edition and just removed Mario Kart. Right. That's what's happened here. So it's like, all right, well, yeah, I don't know enough to know how we get out of this mess, and when and how prices on this stuff can come back down. But it's hard not to feel really defeated by everything happening right now. So really, it's not good, not a good time at the moment for most of the world, I'd say.
Well, it's a question really of whether supply can increase to match demand on the memory and the storage side. Those are the two sort of costs that are driving consoles things in particular. There are moves being made there, as I understand it, but the fact is you can't just spin up a RAM production facility overnight to accommodate demand. It's going to take time. The question is whether it's going to impact the next generation. We had the Sony financial report coming in saying that revenue or other profits are down slightly because they're going to be, or rather lower than expected, I guess, because they're looking to invest in the next generation, which is going to be, apparently next year. Hopefully, supply chains would have improved since then. You'd think so, at least to a certain degree.
My hope is that demand for this stuff will slightly decrease because, I mean, a lot of it has been driven by AI, and I feel like as of this year, more than ever, the anti-AI sentiment has increased so sharply that I hope this has some effect on financials and investments, where they're thinking maybe this isn't the future after all, and pull it back. Because most people are I think before were ambivalent, but now hate it, right? There's a lot of people that hate it, a lot of people that still love it, but like, I don't know. I want to see some change happen.
Any final thoughts, Oliver?
Well, I wouldn't be so confident there will be relief there, but I think over the long term, what we could see is a bit more of a stabilization in the market. But maybe ultimately we have to adjust, as regrettable as that might seem, to higher component prices for some of these key components that go into computers. And I'm also not necessarily convinced that this is the last that we'll see of this problem, because there's like a huge run on CPUs right now. CPU prices are going up. Fab capacity is being strained. You can even look at like some weird upstream inputs, like, various glasses that are used in the manufacturing process of different kinds of computer components. Those are going up in price as well. Various ceramics, like, it does seem like a widespread industry issue. So not feeling too good about it at the moment. And of course, we're focusing on consoles in this conversation, but PC components are going up as well. And you see pre-builds increasing in price by $200, $300 in the low-end segment of the market. Obviously,
Oh yeah.
RAM prices and storage upgrades are ridiculous. And it just kind of, it's increasingly becoming a market where I think the demands of high-end computing are putting pressures on gaming components in ways that really have not occurred before. And it's not a positive development, I think, for gamers in general. It's just not a good outcome. So I'm hoping for some stability in the market soon, at least stability in prices. And over the long term, I'd like to see prices come down, obviously.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's also this story I saw on videocards.com about AMD expecting weaker gaming demand in the second half of 2026. They're expecting a decline of 20%. There's also been reports that motherboard sales have drastically reduced, which kind of makes sense. Oliver, what's driving the CPU cost increase? Is it like the wafer cost or something? Because, there's a huge diversity of processors out there. I can't imagine that, like, a Ryzen 5 9600 is any good for AI. So, what's going on there?
It seems like at the moment, the big issue is that when you have kind of these agentic AI workloads, you demand interaction with more tools, more interaction with the web, more interaction with RAG type workloads, retrieval augmented generation type workloads, and more coordination across different hardware running different kinds of AI workloads that might need to coordinate or depend on the output of other AI workloads. So you end up with basically an increase in demand for CPUs across the board, from AMD and Intel and various manufacturers, from ARM CPU vendors as well. And so that ends up putting a bit of a squeeze on capacity, just at these fabs that the CPU manufacturers have bought out. So it's not like you're using the CPUs to do much machine learning maths, but they are being used in combination, in concert with GPUs in these kinds of more advanced workloads that people are putting to AI processors. So there is a bit more demand on that end. I'm not sure what will happen of it, because people have been predicting a massive rise in the prices of CPUs for months now, and it's not really materialized. But I think there is like a legitimate demand spike. And I mean, if you look historically, that tends to get reflected at some point in increased prices for consumers, especially in the current era. So it's not looking too positive, I'd have to say.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Well, on that depressing note, let's move on. Okay, so something a bit more optimistic is that the next Call of Duty will be arriving on schedule this year. But curiously, and I think it's probably good news overall, is that the franchise is no longer going to support the last generation consoles. So it has been officially confirmed now that Call of Duty, the next Call of Duty, I believe it's Modern Warfare 4, might be wrong, but there's going to be no PlayStation 4 version, which is interesting, because my understanding was there was like a roadmap going forward many, many years. But I guess, there's been a pivot. It's changed. PS4 is in the past. Nintendo Switch 2, though, I suspect that might well be in the future, probably not at launch. But, John, this is kind of good news, right? You'd think it gives the developers more opportunity to stretch their legs, and certainly something needs to happen with Call of Duty to make it a bit more interesting this year.
Ooh, and this is a tricky one for them, I must say. Just cutting older platforms alone, I don't think is going to change anything dramatically because they've been building this technology for so long in a very specific way. But I'm sure it does ease development a bit in that they don't need to consider those older platforms when building out certain aspects of maps. They know what their engine's capable of and where the bottlenecks are. I think the greater issue for them right now is the current, I guess, public backlash to Call of Duty. Call of Duty has come and gone. Not every entry is received particularly warmly.
Yeah.
I think many can agree that, Call of Duty Ghosts and the original Modern Warfare 3 era, and I guess the reboot of Modern Warfare 3 wasn't all that positive, but I feel like the backlash to Black Ops 7 more than most might be one of the strongest like backlashes in the history of the series. And it makes sense because it definitely has a lot of issues, but it also comes after a point where the series has just been releasing, annually for decades at this point. And I think people are finally reaching that saturation point where they're just like, okay, I'm not really interested in this anymore. And it also happened, even though it has its own issues, I think Battlefield 6 actually came out and kind of ate its lunch because they did the whole thing back to what people like before, while Activision was off doing this crazy stuff with Black Ops 7.
Yeah.
Right. And so now they're in the situation where they need to deliver something that's a people pleaser, but you can't pivot in 9 months or whatever.
No.
Right. They get the backlash. They see what's happening, but whatever comes out this year would have been in development for a while. Right. So we just got to hope that they, for their sake, if we're talking from that perspective, that they are able to sort of whatever they were building is more in line with what people want. But at this point, what do people want? I don't know. They've done the thing now where they've essentially, the series started with a focus on World War II, right?
Yeah.
And then we moved forward a bit, and then we were in the modern warfare era. Then we did the future warfare era, and then they went back to World War II, and then they went back to modern warfare, and then they try to do more. It feels like they've done the cycle too many times now, right? And also the whole battle royale genre, they can't lean on that anymore as a new thing. It's been around. Like, basically, they got to come up with something new to revitalize the series, I think. And I don't know how they get there, to be honest. And I don't know what the audience as a whole even wants from it at this point. It's definitely a tricky situation for them, and I'll be curious to see what they do.
Yeah, I think there was the last time they had a major pivot. I think it was, I'm not sure, maybe it was Vanguard that caused issues for them. That didn't do particularly well. But their last major reboot that certainly did like massive numbers was the 2019 Modern Warfare reboot. And to be fair, that was an excellent game.
It was.
That's kind of what we need. I think, I think we just need an excellent game. Easier said than done, right?
I mean, not always, right? Like, I think Infinite Warfare is weirdly probably my favorite campaign.
Yeah, it was great.
That was not well received at the time, and it's clearly, I think Call of Duty fans don't want things to go too futuristic either. So they're right back into that hot zone. Like, Modern Warfare is what people love the most, but they can't just do it again, right?
Yeah,
not so soon.
Oliver, what do you make of all of this?
Well, Rich, it's interesting you bring up Modern Warfare 2019 because that's the last time I really felt like there was a major step change in the graphical fidelity of Call of Duty. And perhaps that's what we need again to entice players, to make them excited. And certainly the idea that you would be dropping the PlayStation 4 as a target platform does seem to free that up. But I'm not really sure, kind of like John mentioned a little bit, I'm not really sure what that implies about the graphics technology in Call of Duty or the direction of Call of Duty overall, because it seems not so clear that there was never a PS4 version of this game in development, right? Possibly it was in development at one point. And I'm not really sure what they've been cooking in the Call of Duty development teams and if they would have it ready for 2026. We know that ray tracing has been involved in a couple titles in some form. The last time it was like in a really significant way in the console versions, for instance, was in 2020's Call of Duty title.
Yeah.
You know, it could be more of an iterative step. I could definitely see 2026's Call of Duty taking a more iterative step in some of these respects. Like, you know, you're free of 8 GB RAM limits, you're free of spinning disks. You can push more on like photogrammetry and having, you know, better development resources for current gen only and really pushing things out a little bit. Maybe pushing out the complexity of gameplay environments and scenarios because you're no longer constrained to trying to hit 60 hertz on a Jaguar at 1.6 gigahertz. That's not too hospitable, right? Even if you're missing it much of the time or most of the time, as recent Call of Duty games have on PS4, that's still a major constraint, I would say, relative to a Zen 2 processor. You know, I mean, but there are a lot of complicating factors here. Like you're looking at what they're trying to target with like Switch 2 and low-end PCs, and is that really going to scale so well? And exactly how willing are they to push graphics technology in a really advanced, modern, current generation title? Because like we've seen with Battlefield 6, which is analogous to this game in many ways, they really aren't willing to push that graphics technology around like high-end platforms. They're targeting a much wider range of systems. Maybe they have like additive ray tracing features. That could be a possibility, but I'm not sure they would really bake it into the core like GI of the rendering there. And plus, they've seemed more conservative in the past with like, you know, going towards ray tracing but then pulling back from it in recent titles. So I'm not really sure where their wants would be in this title. But yeah, it's interesting. At least it opens up the possibility there could be some major graphical enhancements to Call of Duty, because in recent history, it really feels like there's been this uncomfortable conservatism, and perhaps that's catching up to them a little bit with more recent titles, as well as like the very, I think, flawed co-op campaign structure of Black Ops 7 that just didn't appeal to me at all. Actually, Black Ops 7 is the first Call of Duty I can think of in basically the history of the franchise where I've just had no interest in playing it. Like, to be honest with you, I've had very, very little interest in playing the game, whereas I usually step into the campaigns at some point of these titles. I just have no interest in that title. So I do think they need to turn the franchise around, and I hope that part of that is going to be a graphical revitalization for the series, because I think it's long overdue, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Oliver, because like I also, you know, I admit I'm guilty to enjoying a Call of Duty campaign.
Right.
You know, they're kind of like popcorn flicks, right? And conceptually, I like all the weird psychological stuff that they were showing in Black Ops 7 and the weird giants, and just there's a lot of nonsense in there that like was like, oh yeah, this looks cool, but then you actually play it and realize, oh, okay, the setup of this, it just feels like a weird multiplayer game add-on, right? Like the fact that you're supposed to be there with other players, but if you're there in single player, there's like other people in the cutscenes, and then they all just disappear when you're actually playing, and you're just like there alone, and the whole thing feels super disjointed and weird, and more like just sort of like a series of missions connected by some multiplayer framework as opposed to a proper campaign. And so like they really botched that one bad. And there was that other, I guess that was also Black Ops 3 had this issue big time where the campaign was just this like weird throwaway. Like it started out okay, cinematic enough, but then you realize, oh wait, it's actually just a bunch of like Warzone map stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Turned into a campaign. Like they can't, like campaigns I know are expensive. I don't know what the return on investment on that is, but you know, it's part of the fun for some of us.
Wasn't that Modern
Absolutely.
Warfare 3, John? That was the problem.
What's that?
Modern Warfare 3 with the funny campaign? Was that
Yeah,
Black Ops 3
remember
as well?
Modern Warfare 1 and 2 reboots were awesome.
Yep.
And then Modern Warfare 3 comes along, and they did that whole thing where like it starts off cinematic and interesting. But like it quickly devolves into like using the Warzone map as like a crutch. And you're doing missions across the Warzone map. Right. And then I guess after that was Black Ops 6?
Yes,
I think
Black
so.
Ops 6. I think you're correct.
I liked the Black Ops 6 campaign. I thought that was pretty fun.
Okay.
I enjoyed that one.
Black Ops 4
I don't
didn't
know,
have
did
a
you play
campaign
that?
at all, so I guess that's an improvement. But
No,
Yeah.
but instead it had
had very
the
good
Black Ops
multiplayer.
4 logo with the 4 notches instead of the usual Roman numeral.
right.
I think what's really interesting here is that we're having real problems remembering what actually happened in these particular installments of Call of Duty. And there's been so many iterations now of Black Ops and Modern Warfare. Maybe there is an argument for something new, some new Call to Duty.
Yeah, agreed.
I wish them well. I mean, has there been technological innovation in the recent Call of Duty games? Substantial technological innovation. I mean, I've spent some time with the guys at the Technology Hub in Poland, and they're always onto new stuff. They're always doing new stuff. They have to create systems for specific parts of, say, a campaign. Just to make stuff happen. For example, in Vanguard, I think there was a flying section in Vanguard, and they had to come up with their own volumetric cloud solution that would work at 60 hertz. And they only did that because it was required for that particular section of the game, but it becomes part of the engine, right? But, there's that kind of stuff. But then you get stuff like Modern Warfare 2019, which was a proper revamp of the engine, and I'm hoping that's what we're going to get this time around. But yeah, again, just have to wait and see. Okay, well, let's move on to our next topic. So this one's kind of weird. We had reports earlier this week that Pragmata on PlayStation 5 Pro was running at 1080p resolution internal when we'd already said that it was 864p, which obviously, means we have to go back and take a look at it, right? Did we get it wrong? Was it the fact that actually we got it right, but then there was a patch that changed things and then we have to update? And it turns out to be the latter. In our original coverage of Pragmata, 864p was the resolution that we got for both of the modes, the main PlayStation 5 Pro mode, which is kind of equivalent to what the resolution mode is doing on the base unit. And there's a high frame rate mode as well. Now, as I understand it, the high frame rate mode in the current patch still runs internally at 864p. Still looks good, mind you, but compared to the base PlayStation 5, because it's got that lower internal resolution, the RT reflections will kind of look substandard compared to the base PlayStation 5. However, it is true that the 60 hertz mode does now run at a higher resolution. It runs at 1080p, native 1080p, that is confirmed, and it is using PSSR2 to upscale to 4K, and I think it looks great. This came to light when there was a video posted by a YouTube channel I really rate, Brazil Pixel. He's got this DCT-based visualization technology that actually gives you real-time measurements of internal rendering resolutions. It's really, really cool. I do highly recommend checking out that channel. And the 60 hertz mode was coming out as 1080p there, which didn't match our coverage. Now, this does seem to have been introduced at patch 1.21, and the only update from Capcom about that patch was that it saw the official introduction of PSSR2 there. I'm wondering what's happening here. What's happened here, Oliver? Do you think maybe? I mean, I've got some performance footage here of the native 1080p, and it's running very, very nicely. Mostly 60 frames per second. Very, very rare dips that you won't really notice. Certainly a lot more performant than the resolution mode on base PlayStation 5. And I'm kind of wondering whether it was just a bug. Maybe it was meant to be native 1080p, but wasn't in prior patches and it was fixed. But regardless, there has been a change and it hasn't really impacted performance. So it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, certainly the fact that they shipped the game with PSSR 1 suggests that perhaps, or that it wasn't intended, because PSSR 1 is not so flattering in this title. And of course, a couple months ago, we had RE Requiem as the very first title with the enhanced PSSR. So I think Capcom was fairly keen on it, especially given that the results, even just from enabling it in the systems toggle, were quite good in this title, I thought. So that was an odd omission for sure. But yeah, just in general, having a PS5 version with a higher 1080p rendering resolution, or alternatively 1440p, but I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, 1080p resolution relative to PS5 Pro with its 864p resolution, certainly unusual, even though, of course, we have to say in this case that PS5 Pro was still producing a much better looking image, owing to the fact that it was using proper upscaling here, proper machine learning based upscaling. It looks much better than the base PlayStation 5, I would have to say. But yeah, just a weird situation because typically we expect to see higher rendering resolutions than PS5 Pro. Unusual to see the opposite. I would expect here that probably in a lot of shots you're not going to see that much of a difference, especially in still shots. But in motion And especially when looking at that ray tracing, you're going to see a larger increase. I don't really know, honestly, I don't really know what thought process would produce this if indeed it was intentional in the first place to ship with 864p. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I don't think their telemetry would have been indicating this was the correct move at the time, because obviously they've upgraded to 1080p seemingly without a real consequence there. So I'm not really sure what was going on with this particular title. It's quite unusual in my experience to see a console title upgraded with a resolution enhancement for like a default mode, except in odd circumstances where developers are maybe adding a new toggle into the mix. But this is not a new toggle, this is just the default behavior of the game, and yet they're adjusting it in this way post-launch. So I think it suggests that probably the game was undertuned for the title, for the PlayStation 5 in its launch configuration. And I'm certainly glad they're going back to this, but I'm not really sure what it says about the initial configuration of that game. They had all this performance headroom on tap, apparently, and didn't choose to exercise it.
Yeah, I mean, my first question to Tom was, because, everybody makes mistakes, and that's fine, because we're all human. It's like, you sure you weren't running the 120 hertz mode and just capturing at 60? But we've got all the captures. It was confirmed that it was originally 864p. It wasn't a mistake on our behalf, but there was this sort of undocumented upgrade, and it's kind of a bit weird that it wasn't documented. Kind of suggests to me that maybe it was a mistake. I don't know. What do you think, John?
It's difficult to say. I mean, mistakes like that certainly slip through, especially in this era where I could see them, making a settings change by accident, not noticing it. Or maybe it's actually something where they deliberately were able to slightly squeeze out a little more performance and decided to up the res, or you just never know with any of these sorts of things, because shipping games is so difficult and a lot of last minute stuff can sneak in. And yeah. So
Yeah.
beyond that, I don't really have much more to say. It's just it's an odd situation for sure. It makes it frustrating for the type of stuff that we're doing, though. That's for sure.
I think one of the takeaways from Tom's review was that the PlayStation 5 Pro version was significantly better than the base PlayStation 5 version. And I have to admit, I mean, I spent a lot of time with the base PlayStation 5 version in order to do that 1440p upgrade, quote unquote upgrade video. And now I've had a chance to play it on the professional, and it's just a lot better. It's the performance is not impacted with ray tracing in the same way that it is on the base PlayStation. You get that proper image quality boost to 4K thanks to PSSR2. There's no FSR1 shenanigans involved, which, to be frank, it looks pretty poor. So yeah, this is a great example of a game that really is sort of demonstrated that we're finally seeing this proper divide between base PlayStation 5 and Pro software. But yeah, certainly an interesting anomaly, so to speak, and we're going to have another one in the next news story. But I think it is fair to say that pretty much all of the issues with Pragmata on PlayStation 5 are gone now. The lower quality RT reflections versus the base unit, gone. PSSR2 officially implemented now. This is a really good game. I highly recommend checking it out. But let's move on. Okay, speaking of weird anomalies, Oliver, we've had this weird report that playing games, specifically RE Engine games on Switch 2, you can increase performance by running the games in GameChat, which seems counterintuitive because our understanding is that GameChat actually imposes a hit on system resources.
Yes.
So you decided to look into this, and there are some curious results, right? But I think we should couch this by saying it appears to be a specific Capcom RE Engine thing, right?
Right. So first of all, I have to tip my hat to the DF supporter Draga, who is very helpful and often shares some insights into Switch 2. He's very interested in the console, and a big shout out to him for the guidance in this one, because he actually discovered this issue, or encountered this issue in the first place, it seems. Basically, in Switch 2 software, notionally, you'd expect that GameChat shouldn't affect too much with the system. But actually, what I've noticed is that GameChat does affect some games. This was actually part of Nintendo's guidance to developers before launch, that GameChat could cause some issues with performance in some Switch 2 software. And I've noticed in some titles that have unlocked frame rates in particular, which you can notice here in Layers of Fear.
Yep.
GameChat doesn't appear to do too much, but it can depress performance. So here in an unlocked frame rate area, comparing the game running normally to the game in GameChat with the small window size, the game is losing about 7.5% of performance, which is, kind of typical here. It doesn't seem to affect performance that much, but just having GameChat enabled in some of these scenarios where you're already dropping frames, it can drop frames a little bit more, which suggests a higher GameChat cost. But if we move over to Pragmata, specifically the Pragmata demo, Pragmata goes from about 54 FPS in regular play in this shot to 60 FPS with the GameChat window in small mode, which is bizarre. Or if we go over to this shot, we have 47 FPS in normal play, then 46 FPS with the GameChat window in full size, right? So a lower performance level. But then 58 FPS with the GameChat window in medium size, and then 60 FPS with the GameChat window in small size. So the smaller the GameChat window size, the better the performance. The same thing also happens in Kinetsugami, which is another RE Engine title. So it's 51 FPS normally in this shot, and then 60 FPS with the GameChat window in small configuration. So what's going on here? Now I did some pixel counting, and it turns out that in this smallest window size, Pragmata is actually rendering at a lower resolution. It's rendering at 360p internal, whereas the normal game renders at 540p internal, right, in docked mode on Pragmata. And then with the medium window size, it's 432p internal. So the smaller the GameChat window size, the smaller the resolution. Now the game is changing rendering behavior here basically based on the window size, which is, I suspect it's the case for all the RE Engine titles we see on Switch 2. I'm not sure if it's the case for other titles on Switch 2. Certainly our indication with Layers of Fear is that it isn't. But broadly speaking, I think it should really just be the case for these RE Engine titles until we know otherwise. But basically what's going on here is it seems that RE Engine titles are adjusting resolution based on the window output size, and they're kind of almost viewport aware on some level, where the games aren't scaling based on the output resolution of the system itself, like other Switch 2 games. I've noted also that if you decrease the resolution output of these games from 4K to like 720p in the system settings, it doesn't actually do anything. It's just the window size. When you change it, it lowers the resolution and increases performance. So it's very unusual. It's almost like PC-like behavior in some games where you change the window size, it can change the resolution of the game. But in most cases on Switch 2, I think the OS is simply scaling the output into the GameChat window. But for whatever reason, in these titles, quite the opposite. So this is a weird performance hack. This is a weird little performance hack for these titles. If you do feel the need for a 60 FPS Pragmata experience, you can't, and you want to play in a window that only occupies like 50% of the screen. If you do want to open up a GameChat window and play this game, you can get a faster performance level. But I think that, this indicates all kinds of interesting things about the way these games scale, and obviously we'd understand these games probably would scale based on resolution. Maybe Capcom should consider possibly adding a mode here or there for like, different kinds of output resolutions, different kinds of performance levels. But in general, it's just kind of a fascinating tweak that suggests there's something interesting going on with RE Engine that we're not quite fully keyed into. But just like this really weird quirk that was pointed out to me that I think is kind of fascinating and kind of bizarre, and probably isn't something you should want to explore in your own time, but is something that could potentially have some utility if you really don't like unlocked frame rates.
Right. Okay. I think the costs might be a bit too high there. I don't know what you make of this, John. A weird anomaly, certainly interesting. There was a developer guidance that using GameChat would potentially impact game performance. It looks as though Capcom has actually taken measures here to mitigate it, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, where it's like, okay, there's a performance impact, so logically it would make sense for them to do this. But I guess the unexpected consequences, they lowered it enough where it improves performance. But I really don't like this part of Capcom's RE Engine sort of stuff. Is the thing I don't like, is this insistence on running above what a device can deliver. Right? Where a lot of these RE Engine games, especially on last generation consoles, would ship where the frame rate's just fully uncapped, and I really find that annoying. Like, I don't like that sort of feeling. But we also know that they've never been able to pull off a 30 FPS cap properly either, based on Dragon's Dogma 2. So I don't know, man. It's a weird one. This kind of reminds me of back in the day when discovering, like, wait, if you lower your Xbox 360 or PS3 to like 480p, it improves performance of a lot of games by just lowering the resolution.
Yep.
It's basically that kind of hack.
Yep.
Which is, it's an interesting discovery.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of games on Switch 2 that have that quote unquote feature. You lower the system level resolution, you get higher frame rates. We reported in the past about Hitman World of Assassination. There are one or more other games that do so. Yeah, this is kind of cool, I think. Kind of weird. I don't think it has any kind of practical application whatsoever.
Yeah.
But we do have answers now, Oliver.
Yeah, in general with Switch 2, I'm not such a big fan of like these kind of undocumented modes or these undocumented issues with games where, like you said, Rich, Hitman scales based on output resolution. These games don't scale based on output resolution, but they do scale based on window size. And then some games have weird behavior like Cyberpunk, where if you engage 120 hertz in the system settings, they'll always run at a 120 hertz container on Switch 2. And you have to actually disable, like changing the settings does not change the output refresh of the game. You have to go into the system settings and change the output to actually get that adjustment. So there's some weird stuff going on with Switch 2 that I'm not such a big fan of, actually. And I just wish that people were more upfront with these kinds of undocumented modes. I mean, in this case, it is fairly unobtrusive because, like, it does make sense that you'd scale. Like, it's not too offensive to me, they're scaling resolution in this way, even though it's kind of bizarre. I mean, it's fun enough, but like these undocumented modes, I mean, it makes our lives more difficult, and I ultimately don't think it's good for the consumer. And like, I'm not really sure Capcom's priorities are in the right place, because like John mentioned, they really do like their uncapped frame rates. I don't know what's going on. They keep porting these games to Switch 2. Seems to work out well. For the most part, they don't have a good history of frame rate capping, like John pointed out. But actually, Monster Hunter Wilds had a pretty good frame rate cap back in the day, so they do know how to do it on some level. Like it did work out in that title.
Right. I actually never tested that cap. Is it actually stable?
It's stable. It's stable. I mean,
it
has some drops, right? Minus the drops, it is stable. It doesn't have frame pacing issues in that title.
Also, they have done it.
Yeah,
interesting.
So I hope they could do it with this title. I do think it's a choice. I don't think it's a technical constraint. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think at this point it's a choice.
Yeah. I mean, I'm reminded that Resident Evil 4 on the PlayStation 4, that ran unlocked, and it wasn't particularly great. And the noted modder Illusion put in a 30 FPS cap into that game that worked with proper frame pacing. It was simply a case of calling the Sony library that handles 30 FPS caps. So it is doable. I think in that case, that library does have possibly some latency implications based on what we saw with Bloodborne, where a similar mod was introduced there. I think they just do it because that's the way they want their games presented. It's not, if we disagree with it, there's not much we can do about it.
There's other versions to play, so whatever. Yeah. You can get stable for performance if you want.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, well, enough of that. Let's move on to our final story. Okay, then, our final news story of the week. And it's basically what you might call a celebration. It's been 10 years to the week, or rather it is at the time of recording, that Nvidia unveiled the Pascal architecture, the GTX 10 series. And there are the announcements of GTX 1080 specifically. And that was followed by, obviously, the less capable cards. And then finally, the 1080 Ti. Pascal. What an architecture, what a series of products. Gigantic performance boosts for 10 series versus 9 series, when 9 series was already like, the GTX 980, was specifically the 970, was kind of like legendary products. And they're still kind of revered to this day, the last of the great rasterization cards from Nvidia, one might suggest. Huge performance boosts. Good pricing as well. So, basically a lot of love for Pascal. And 10 years. I was at the presentation where it was announced, and I do remember looking at the bar charts and then measuring the size of the bars in an effort to get an idea of just how much faster the GTX 1080 was. And it turned out that the bar charts were a little conservative. It was a fantastic product. One of the first cards where you could properly say for the games of the time it actually did do a pretty good native 4K experience. That was a surprise at the time. Amazing stuff. Other things that were great about it, I mean, the process node just allowed for some super high clocks, and also super efficient as well. So the GTX 1070, broadly equivalent to the Titan X from the prior generation. It was like running at 150 watts, the kind of generational leaps that we don't really see in terms of pure performance these days, and getting these huge power savings at the same time. Amazing stuff, right, John? What I will say, though, is that I do think there has been kind of, there were some great things about Pascal, specifically that the mobile versions, this architecture was so power efficient that the mobile versions, the laptop chips, were basically, almost as fast as their desktop equivalents, something we don't see today for sure. Lots of great things, but I do also remember stuff like AMD's DX12 performance was significantly better than Nvidia's at the time. And I do remember there were questions asked of Nvidia's Tom Peterson at the press event. It's like, okay, so what about your DX12? How is it? And he said, well, it's faster, because it's it's like 9 series but faster. So obviously your DX12 performance will be faster. And this was in an era where AMD was kind of wiping the floor with Nvidia in certain respects with DX12. So I do think there has been a kind of certain degree of revisionist attitudes towards Pascal, because it did have weaknesses at the time. But at the same time, there's a lot of people out there, specifically on like 1080 Ti, who are, they've stuck with that card through many, many generations. And it's only now where games physically can't run on it and upgrades are due. What's your thought on this 10-year anniversary?
Wow, I feel old.
Yeah, we both.
So you were at the presentation, but I remember I was at E3 2016 that year.
Yeah.
And Nvidia had a big event for this as well. And I remember seeing a bunch of demos and seeing the card in action. And I think it was there, but I got one of those USB sticks. I think.
Yeah. I never got one of those, but it was the USB stick in the shape of a 1080, right?
Right, and the box itself that it came in looks like a GPU Founders Edition box. Like, I still have that thing. I love that. It's a cool little USB memento, if you will. And yeah, that card, man, that era was really good. Especially when it comes to like price performance. It's one of the best we ever had, right?
Yeah.
Like, the card was a very reasonable price. I think it was $599 for base price, with $699 for the Founders Edition on the 1080 model. And then I think we had the 1080 Ti in 2017.
Yeah, $699, I think, that one. But for the performance you got and the memory increase, it was really, really cool. The 1060 6 gigabytes, that was $249, and it basically gave you equivalent to GTX 980 performance, which is.
But I guess looking back, what I really realized from this, though, is that this essentially was the end of the roughly 10-year period where PC gaming went down this like linear upgrade path, right?
Yeah.
For years, PC gaming didn't operate in this way. You didn't just have performance boosts with little else. It wasn't just like, all right, here's the same thing as before, but it's faster. From the original early 90s, late 80s kind of PC stuff to like the introduction of 3D cards, every new generation would introduce like major sweeping changes, and like they were adding on and like building up what 3D could be. There's the programmable shader era, like GeForce 3 comes along and does that. They just kept building on the technology and adding new things that were beyond what was possible before. But I think from around 2006 onward, a lot of previously PC exclusive developers largely shifted to console development, and the PS3 and the 360 were around for a very long time. And I think that very directly influenced the way the PC market played out for a while, where there wasn't really much of a need to push new technologies. It was just about doing what those things were doing faster, right?
Right.
Things stalled out. It was only with the jump to Xbox One and PS4 where a lot of new paradigms were starting to be established, still early, And then I think new research and development started on the GPU side as well to sort of like push in new directions at that point. And the GTX 1080 is basically like the final form of a purely rasterized focused 3D accelerator. And it did so at a good price, good timing. It lasted a long time. It was one of Nvidia's best cards along the side, say like the 8800 GT series or whatever, which was another seminal card from, I guess, 9 years prior to this. The ones that were there alongside Crisis, which was a PC melting, pushing the envelope kind of game, and one of the last of its kind for a while, unfortunately. But I actually think when looking back across history, I think that the Turing GPU from 2018 actually holds up better than Pascal ever did. And it got a lot of like heat because this is where ray tracing and machine learning and things were introduced. And those were not, and just like with pixel shaders and other technologies, they weren't super performant out of the gate. That's not why you bought the cards. But in terms of what that card supports, Turing was very modern, right? And it's still basic, can run anything on the market today at variable levels of performance, of course, but like it was the modern GPU in 2018.
Right.
And this is where we've been moving since, right? So basically, it really did change the game, and it provided good rasterization performance, really good rasterization performance. It still holds up today. So I think that whole generation, I mean, that period in there was pretty interesting because it marked the end of something and then the beginning of something, but like they both were great products in retrospect, even if Turing got a lot of, heat for its newfound focus. People weren't used to that anymore, but 1080 really was like the final hurrah of pure rasterization, the end of the we're focused on consoles exclusively, and PC graphics are not evolving much anymore, period. They're just getting faster and higher resolution. But still, great card. I had one, of course. I loved it. I think this was also the generation where we got the Titan X Pascal and then the Titan XP,
Yes,
which were actually different products.
Yeah, based on the same chip. But yes,
Right.
Based on the same chip and just a few more shaders. Yeah, that was kind of weird. Yeah, that's for
Right.
sure. Your sentiment about Turing is matched by this supporter question from Marcus. Hiya, Foundryman! Exclamation point. For many of us, the GTX 10 series was our first proper PC gaming GPU generation, and Pascal still has a legendary reputation. I sometimes wonder, though, whether we are a little too nostalgic for it, especially when the RTX 20 series may have aged better in feature terms thanks to DLSS support and full DX12 Ultimate compatibility. How do you see the legacy of Pascal versus Turing today? I think you answered that one already, John. Hope you have a great week! Exclamation point.
I mean, Rich, it's like we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, but like look at what AMD was doing at the time, like an RX 580 or something, right? How's the RX 580 holding up in 2026?
Yeah, not
that
great.
well.
Similar to a GTX 1060, which was its sort of equivalent at the time. Yeah, I mean, that all kind of makes sense. I think the thing about Turing, though, is obviously it was an architecture built for the future, but it kind of persisted. We finally made good on its features. Yeah. DLSS became a thing, and it works on it. Even the newer DLSS things work on it, apart from frame generation. And ray tracing obviously is a thing. I did a video a little while back about the 5060 versus 2080 Ti, and it is the case that they have very similar compute performance, but the 5060 is limited compared to the 2080 Ti because it has less memory, which is an interesting state of affairs. Obviously, there's a lot of extra features that the 5060 can do. Its power efficiency is kind of off the charts compared to the 2080 Ti, but ultimately, it's good to see that card is still is still viable. 8 years on. Pascal, maybe there is a bit of a sort of rose-tinted view, a nostalgic view of it. But the point is that when those cards came out, they were just so fast and so efficient, and certainly in the case of the 1080 Ti, it just kept on and on and on. It's fantastic.
It's interesting, Rich. We're talking about, the Steam machines and everything, right?
Right.
We're anticipating that.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's been pricing issues, but the 2080 Ti is still a more capable product, right? GPU wise than what's going to be in the Steam machine.
Yes, you're quite right.
So I feel like that just further supports just how darn viable that thing is. If you bought one of those back then and you just stuck with it, I mean, you're still doing pretty good today. And I guess part of that has to do with the rise of these small form factor and handheld PCs, plus its forward looking architecture. So it's kind of the GOAT.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, if you consider that the Steam Machine GPU is probably at some midway point between the 3060 and the 4060, and it has 8 gigs of memory, then the 2080 Ti will be faster and it has more memory. So yes, logically, that is the case. Oliver, any thoughts on this particular anniversary?
Yeah, I think one underappreciated aspect of the 10 series launch, and I remember this acutely from my time during like 2013 to 2012 to 2016, is that we were stuck in GPU land on 28 nanometers. It was very unusual at the time to be stuck on a node for 4 years, as we effectively were during that period. Right. And to be stuck on 28 nanometers really meant that the improvements that you saw from like the 900 series from Maxwell, that was really an architectural improvement. It was not a lithographic improvement because they abandoned plans to ship Maxwell on 20 nanometers, which was another kind of planner process from TSMC. Did not actually end up working out very well. There were a number of mobile processors that were very compromised that were 20 nanometer mobile processors, and they did not end up shipping large GPUs on 20 nanometers. The Switch 1 was infamously on 20 nanometers as well, yes. But a lot of products were moved on to 16 nanometers very shortly thereafter. 16 nanometers basically being similar in pitch to 20 nanometers, but it had 3D FinFET transistors that helped to keep those chips under control in ways that 20 nanometers did not. That was a big improvement for all vendors, but it was an especially big improvement for Nvidia. But I do agree, I do concur with John in particular, that people look back on 10 series because it was like the last big linear performance increase that we saw that was compelling, that came with reasonable prices, that did represent a large increase in rasterization performance and a big nanolithographic leap before the introduction of like this kind of ray tracing machine learning paradigm that's changed things so much. But I also, like John, think it's important to reflect on 20 series on Turing, perhaps even more than Pascal, because like, its rasterization performance increase was comparably weak. I remember like those cards were like, 20%, 30% faster, which at the time was seen as being a pretty weak rasterization improvement. Nowadays, that would be seen as a pretty decent one. But, times have changed, I suppose. But obviously those cards were really, really capable for machine learning and ray tracing workloads in such a forward-looking way. But even in 2026, those titles are still useful for meaningful machine learning acceleration for the DLSS suite and very good ray tracing acceleration above and beyond the consoles, even for some of those higher-end cards. So I think that it was a very forward-looking architecture that importantly took some very unpopular steps, right? Very unpopular, especially in retrospect, to have just focus on die area for machine learning for ray tracing. In many cases, people do not look on that very favorably. But at the time, those were the correct calls, and I think they were courageous calls. NVIDIA made those calls, and given how important ray tracing and machine learning have been to graphics learning over the past 8 years, those were the correct calls. And I think they were brave, especially because I don't think NVIDIA knew that DLSS was going to be such a hit, right? DLSS 1 was not the best technology in the history of graphics rendering. It certainly did not arguably justify that die area expense. But DLSS 2 was a revelation, and subsequent DLSS models have been just gravy, just great. So I think that NVIDIA has done a really great job here, and I think that architecture will stand the test of time, even though on paper, it's not the same linear performance increase we saw with Pascal, right? It's not as exciting. It's not this great nanolithographic increase, but arguably it's aged all the better, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've got another supporter question here from Screaming Lord Sandwich. Another classic Digital Foundry supporter program, Hacker Alias. Howdy DF team, with Pascal turning 10 years old, what do you think NVIDIA got most right? with the GTX 10 series era that modern GPU generations have arguably lost? Was it purely a value/performance moment? Are we blinded by nostalgia? Or was there something fundamentally different about the pace of graphical progress at the time? Interested in your take as always. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was the case that there was a period of time. I mean, when GPU accelerators first came out, it was about obviously accelerating graphics, right? But it was also about using the technology to do different things with the GPU. So, as you've documented many, many times, John, that the 3D accelerator era early on was like the Wild West of a huge amount of different standards kind of like vying for dominance. And then we kind of moved into this period where most GPUs were, following everything that was set by DirectX, and maybe you got some sort of weird stuff like TurfWorks from Nvidia, the Works stuff, Hairworks, where it was an attempt to do proprietary features that nobody was that interested in. And Pascal is kind of like the ultimate iteration of, this is a GPU, we've made it go really fast, we've made it extremely efficient, we've used all of the process technology that TSMC have given to us, and we've delivered these fantastic products for the time. Oh, and here's a laptop that's just as good as your desktop, which, was pretty awesome. The thing is, have we lost that? Well, the reason we've lost it is because we don't have those process node jumps anymore. So we're kind of like veering back to the features. And 20 series was an attempt to reset the paradigm. And 20 series alone wouldn't do it. It needed the software. That took time. 30 series came along, which offered huge performance upgrade. And, ray tracing became more prevalent, and you got DLSS2 in that sort of time period as well. So, things changed. I'm more interested now in what's happening next with the 60 series, because where do you go from here? Obviously, we want path tracing. We want more path tracing. I mean, again, playing Pragmata recently is so much better with path tracing. I want more of that. But are Nvidia going to reset the paradigm again? Are they going to move more towards dedicating a higher proportion of silicon to tensor cores, machine learning acceleration? Is that the right call? That's something that's going to be up for debate. Is it just going to be another iteration of the existing architectures? The thing about Nvidia is they do take those risks, and Turing was a huge risk for sure. It paid off, but it paid off over time, and I'm kind of curious about what's going to happen next. It could go either way. I guess we just need to wait and see.
Yeah, one of the other things to think about, I think Turing actually launched just $100 more than the 1080. So the 1080 was $100 less than the 1080 or than the 2080, right? It was like $599 versus $699. But I believe it was Turing where Nvidia launched like their high-end cards right away, like the TI.
Yes,
which
that's
traditionally higher end cards came later, and they were expensive. But I think by doing the 2080 Ti at launch for like $1,000, it set a precedent that really caused issues, right? Because like it felt like a gigantic price increase.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that has kind of persisted, and GPU prices have spiraled kind of out of control, right? Like $1,000 for the highest end model seems totally fine now compared to where we're at. And I know things obviously have. I don't want to get into the whole economics behind why these things change, but I feel the 1080 was an interesting point because at $599 it was like you get like this super big increase for like a very reasonable price. And if the 2080 had launched without the Ti alongside it for $699, I think people wouldn't have had a negative reaction to that either. But it was definitely this like it did, even though it's a great card and marks like sort of the future where graphics were going, it also kind of started that trend of like super expensive GPUs right out of the gate,
right? Yeah,
which has caused affordability problems in the PC gaming space.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think it's the case that there wasn't like a step change in rasterized performance with Turing with the 2080, right? But guess what?
Right.
We've got another product for you. It's called the 2080 Ti, but if you want that performance, you're going to need to pay extra for it. That's kind of like set the precedent, right? And obviously, maybe that was reset a touch with 30 series. But, there was still that 39. The thing is, 30 series was another value monster, right? Because, $699 for the 3080. That was great. And you could pay, I think it was like $1,500 for the 3090, but it wasn't meaningfully faster. It wasn't like a step change in the way that 2080 Ti was compared to the 2080. So they kind of rode it back, but then obviously it went into overdrive again with the 40 series.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
No, what remind me, Rich, was the Titan RTX, I think, was the last Titan they ever did.
Yes.
And that was definitely not launch, right?
No, that came later, but it was basically just a 2080 Ti with more memory. You got extra CUDA cores, but they didn't really do anything in gaming. But you got double the memory. No, that's not true. You got 12 gigs rather than 11.
Ah, okay, 12 gigs rather than 11. So I guess really from that point, Titan essentially became the 90, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But also, I think that people get stuck a little bit on the naming, and I agree that it's a bit of a problem. But the fact is, nowadays, when you pay for the 90, it is just a 10 increment over the 80, but it's like a totally different class of GPU. It's like in this case, this generation, it's like twice as big as the 80. It's just crazy the extent to which they've differentiated those products, and obviously they cost a lot more. And I think in part that's in a reasonable attempt to keep prices low for most of their product categories, but it also just reveals this ever widening gulf at the top of the market, where if you want to pay a lot of money, you can get a lot of product, but it doesn't scale anymore like it used to. It doesn't scale anymore like it used to. So that's very unfortunate, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think history is going to be kind to Turing, because if you're looking at 10 series now with nostalgia, it's because the card lasted so long, right? 1080 Ti, the legendary performance. At the same time, though, the 2080 Ti is pretty much doing exactly the same thing now. And it's doing it, allowing you to run these modern features, which I think is pretty cool. I guess 2 years from now, there's going to be a lot of retrospectives about the 2080 Ti. I'm going to be curious to see how viable it is at that point. Probably still pretty viable. Okay. That was the final news topic, therefore the end of the show. So if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, share, ring bells for notifications. DF supporter program, patreon.com/digitalfoundry, early access to DF Direct Weekly, the chance to help shape the show. Pose your questions. We've got the Q&A show coming up soon too, of course, store.digitalfoundry.net for all of our merchandising wares. But that's all from us on this one. We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.